Morning. My name is Ann Glosecki, and I'm a master gardener in Monroe County. And this morning, I'm going to talk about terrariums, and we are going to build a small mason jar terrarium together. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is a terrarium? A terrarium is a closed, clear glass or plastic container filled with plants, or it can be an open, transparent container for growing or displaying some different variety of plants. It's also a great way to grow plants with minimum care. So a little history of terrariums. The use of terrarium containers for growing plants dates back about 2,500 years to Greece. But the invention of the terrarium as we know it today, like this one over here, is traced back to Daniel Nathaniel Ward, a 19th century London epidemiologist. He built closed glass terrariums were filled with the grasses and ferns from Britain, and he loaded it on a cargo ship, and it sailed across the ocean to Australia. 6 months later, arrived in Australia, and the plants were thriving in these containers. These glass containers are what we eventually became known as Wardian cases that you see sometimes at the Missouri Botanical Garden, the big cases with beautiful plants that they store in them. So what do you need to build a terrarium? And I'm going to kind of list some of these things, and then we're going to go into details a little bit about each one of the items you might need to construct a terrarium. First of all, you need a container, and the containers can be all kinds of stuff. The next, we're going to build our foundation, which is going to be our rock or pebbles, and then we're going to do some horticulture charcoal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then we're going to do some moss or some type of soil separator to kind of add a little character to the terrarium. And then, of course, the most part is the soil mix. And then, of course, our plants. And then we can finish off with some decorative items, being rocks or small figurines, or maybe some colored rocks. And then the next thing you may need are some small little tools, and I'll kind of show you what I have and things that you can actually use and get from around your house. So first of all, let's go back to containers. Almost any kind of container can be used for your terrarium. You do want it to be clear glass. So for instance, over here, I have some that I've used around from my house, a fish bowl and that type of stuff. Old spaghetti sauce jar is one that you could use. They do not recommend colored glass because the light coming into the terrarium, it can affect the plants that you may use for your terrarium. So I've listed here some examples, and below on your first sheet are some pictures of some containers you may want to use: a goldfish bowl, an old fish tank, possibly a jug, and maybe even a plastic soda bottle that you want to just put a cute little plant that you may have. The next thing in the terrarium is rock, gravel, or pebbles. And when you're using the rock, gravel, or pebbles for your terrarium, they need to be clean. And the reason you can use fish aquarium rocks if you would like. In your terrarium that I gave you, I put in some natural color looking rocks, or some might have had even some white rocks. And that's used for our drainage. It's the first part of our terrarium. The next, we're going to add some horticulture charcoal, and that's used to help prevent odor buildup. This terrarium right here, I've had it for 3 years, and if I take the top off, it's never had a smell, and I actually contribute that to the charcoal that was put into it. Then the next level, we need a soil separator that keeps the soil from getting down into our drainage area or our rock area. In the case of the terrarium that I gave you, we're going to use moss as our soil separator. You can also use a coffee filter. A nylon stocking has been recommended to use for that. This one right here, I actually did use a coffee filter as my soil separator, and I've had this one, like I said, for 3 years. Next, we got our soil mix, or our growing medium. And your soil mix should be well drained and high in organic material. The soil should be porous enough to allow good drainage and air circulation, but still be able to hold our plants in place. What I'm using is a prepackaged soil mix, and it's peat-based, and it can be bought at most hardware stores or local garden centers. And for this terrarium that you have in your kit, we're using an Expoma moisture mix that I really like to use for my terrariums. Next, I'm going to talk about the one item in your terrarium that basically everything is built around, and that is the plants. Before assembling your terrarium, you probably already have picked out a plant or have something in mind that you would like to put into your container. And so I'm going to briefly talk about some thoughts you might want to consider when you're picking out your plants for your terrarium. So the first thing you may want to think about the plant you have, the terrarium. Is it going to have a lot of humidity in it? And meaning naturally, you might see like moisture on the side. When you're planning to make a closed-in terrarium, like this one here, you will want to use humidity-tolerant plants, such as mosses and ferns. If you want to plant like cactuses or the succulents, you would want to consider an open terrarium. In other words, it does not have a top. You want to think about the size and growth of your plants. So if your terrarium's kind of small, you may want to think, hey, I probably want a smaller plant to use for my terrarium. A bigger one, like a fish tank, you may be able to go for those larger ferns or tropical plants that you could put into your terrarium. Because eventually, depending on how fast it grows, you will have to do some trimming or pruning with that plant. And if it overtakes your terrarium, you may eventually have to remove it because it got too big for your terrarium. The next thing is light. You want to choose plants that will do best in the amount of light where you're going to display your terrarium. And I've listed below some of the light requirements that kind of can be broken into 3 areas. So when you're thinking about light, we start off with low light, which would be enough that you're sitting in a room and you could easily read your newspaper, maybe like light you would receive from a north-facing window. The next is medium light, would be like strong daylight with some direct sun coming in during the day, such as an east-facing window when that sun comes up and then it disappears, usually around noon. And then we have the high light, which would be direct sunlight in your window for most of the day. So that would be probably one of your unobstructed southern windows where the light comes in. And the next is the design or style of terrarium you want to do. Doing an open terrarium or a closed terrarium. And a closed terrarium, you're going to want plants that can handle moisture and humidity. Also, closed terrariums require very little maintenance, easy to take care of. And indirect sunlight is best for a closed terrarium because if it gets direct sunlight from your window, it could actually heat up the inside of the terrarium and burn your plants that are inside. An open terrarium is best for that window, bright light, and for plants that don't need a lot of water and don't mind that direct sunlight. So your succulents, cactuses would be a good example, something to use for an open terrarium. So I've listed some plant suggestions for some different terrarium environments. And again, can be used with low, medium light. Will there be moisture, humidity? But I also found at the Missouri Botanical Garden on their website a wonderful list of plant suggestions for different types of terrarium environments. So I've listed that link below, and they broke it up into many different categories. So you'll be pretty comfortable looking it up by humidity, light, what time of the day you're going to display it, where you're going to display it. And they'll had a list of many, many plants you could use for your terrarium. So the next thing we're going to start now is every one of you received in your kit, hopefully, a mason jar terrarium. So we're going to go ahead and get started putting our terrarium together. So what we're going to do is go ahead and take all your items out of your terrarium. And I hope that the plant that you received, the Echeveria, is still healthy, as it was stuck in the jar for about 10 days if we didn't take it out. So we're going to go ahead and clear everything out of our terrarium. And as we said, the first thing we're going to do, our first layer, is our rocks. So we're going to just take a handful of rocks. I'm going to lay it down into our jar. And as I talked about, there were some small tools to help you use when you're building your terrarium. I bought a less than $10 terrarium kit at Walmart, which contained about 4 little tools to use. But you don't need to pay $10. You can go at home. You need a pair of scissors, and you can go in just your drawer and get a fork and a spoon. The spoon can help you move the soil. The fork can help you kind of drag it around. A sponge for dusting off dirt or soil you may get onto your plant. And then I took some floor wire, because if you have a small opening, you might need a little. So let me back up a little bit to talk about how we got started. So we were getting ready to build our terrarium together. I had started talking about some of the household utensils you could use for this morning to help us create our terrarium. Basically, a spoon will be helpful, a fork. Also, if you have nearby a little brush, but you, like I said, this morning you don't need to have those. So as we got started, we started to put our rock in. So if you have, we should have our first layer in, which is our rocks, and that is for our drainage to help start our foundation for our terrarium. And then the next is our charcoal. And each one of you got a small pack of charcoal in there. So if you have just a small spoon, you just want to sprinkle a couple of teaspoons of charcoal on into our terrarium. And then the next thing was that soil separator. We want to try to keep the soil from getting down into our rock and our charcoal base, because I have found that actually can start to create, can eventually start to create a little mold across it. So it also will block into that rock, which means there's no air circulation anymore. So in your kit, I put in for you some moss, some sphagnum moss that we're going to use. But as I also stated earlier, you could use a coffee filter, a nylon stocking, could be just that layer that you lay down there, and that'll help keep that soil up and out of the rock. So we're just going to take, again, I'm going to take my teaspoon, and we're going to put in, probably about a half an inch, which would be probably about half of this bag. We're going to put in to our terrarium, kind of covering up that rock so it keeps our soil from getting down into it. Again, the fork is useful to start spreading it out for us. And so keep kind of going. So again, once we get it in there, I probably have about, I'd say probably about a half an inch of the moss isn't on that for our, above our rocks. So the next layer we're going to put in is our soil. Again, this is a moisture mix, a pre-packaged that I had bought. It's very organic. If your soil in terrarium is just a little dry, because it has been in there for a little bit, you may want to add some water to it just to moisten it up a little bit, because you want to be able to put it together kind of like so it holds together. As you can see in this case, we're going to put again, and I'm going to put in about an inch, probably this whole bag of soil in my terrarium. Again, kind of taking my fork, spread it out for my plant. Okay. And then now's the most important thing, the fun part of this. And that is, now it's time to go ahead and put our plant in. Each one of you, I put a little, it's an echeveria that was in. A lot of them, if you do buy a plant from the store, you want to loosen the roots up. If you do get one from the store, you want to see those roots nice and clean. And then we're going to take, and I'm just going to place mine, and you can place it in your terrarium where you would like. And again, this is where, like a long pair of tweezers or this hoop that I made with my floral wire can help me kind of lower it down into my terrarium. So with the terrarium, I'm going to make a little hole. And then I am going to take my tweezers, lay it down in there, and then cover up those roots. All right, so everyone can kind of see, I've got mine, and I'm just going to take, and if you're using a fork or spoon, just layering that in there. All right. So now that we've got our plant in there, now it's like, wow, I could use some more in this. So kind of decorate it up a little bit. So I brought along this morning just to kind of show some ideas of, I have here some colored moss. So I'm just going to kind of add some moss in here to give it a little character. And if you want to make it kind of looking fun and stuff, you could take some of the soil and kind of create like a little hill inside to give it a little bit of character. The other thing we can do is, if you have some of the leftover rocks, you could take, lay them out just to give it a nice little touch. I've seen a lot of them where people like to put figurines into the terrarium. I've also seen one where they do a theme, like a Star Wars theme. So their terrarium has got like Star Wars characters in it, or they can do gnomes. And so there's kind of a whole bunch of ideas. In fact, one of the pictures I put at the end of my presentation, there's an individual, he actually put an airplane in it. So he designed it and made it so it looked like a little airport and a little airplane. So you can get as creative as you want using your imagination. So with your kit, it was just to give you a basis to start on how you could put together a terrarium. It's very simple. It could be used and done basically by anyone. My granddaughter has built a terrarium, very easy to do for all ages. So the next thing, now that we've got our terrarium together, And we've kind of got some ideas, or you're thinking ahead of what you like to do, is how do we take care of our terrarium? Now that I've got it together, what do I do? So one of the things when we got done, a lot of times when you're working with it, you might shoot some soil up or get some soil up on your plant. That's where the little brush came in handy, was you could reach down there, kind of move the things around. And then I have a little mister here that I use too to help kind of give it some water, to kind of get some of that soil off the top of that plant. So that bit of care, if you do missed it, you probably will not have to add any water to your terrarium for quite some time. So that does lead into, how do I take care of my terrarium as far as watering? And you want to do just a light watering. And most of the time, like this closed terrarium that I have over here, I've maybe watered it twice, and it's a 3-year-old terrarium. So with a closed terrarium, you do not have to do much watering. This one has a succulent in it, so I'm not going to do a lot of watering with it. Maybe just take a look at, maybe once a month I'll mist it, and that's all I'll be doing with it. With an open container, like I said, with the succulents, your cactuses and stuff, just read the requirements for your plant, because you may not have to do a lot as far as taking care of it. Fertilizing, not very often. And in fact, this one, I just recently gave a shot of fertilizer, and it was very, very, very light fertilizer. The light is probably the most important thing that affects the terrarium. And so where you put your terrarium, bright light, you might see as your plant starts to grow here, you may have to rotate it because it may start growing towards the light. So you may want to rotate your terrarium so it kind of keeps that plant going off and on. This one I have to rotate now and then because this one gets where it's all growing to one side. So I have to rotate it to get it around to the light. And then on occasionally, sadly, you might have a plant die in your terrarium and you will have to take that plant out. Or in this case, I had to trim this up because it was starting to weed and get itself all wound around in my terrarium. So in conclusion, terrariums are a wonderful addition to your home or office. They're very easy to take care of, very minimum to have to do with them. And you can get as creative as you want. It's like doing painting a picture. That's what you can do with terrarium, just using different objects and possibilities. And they are easy to construct, as I said, for all ages. So my granddaughter and I have built them. I've done several of them myself. They're just a lot of fun to do. So thank you for your time. And I hope you had a chance in our little break to go get some coffee and continue on. And if you have any questions, please in the chat box. I can answer them now, or I will get to them here soon and we'll get back and I will answer those questions for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us this morning.